Welcome to another episode of the Workplace Navigation Podcast. Here we discuss issues the workforce encounters in the workplace and propose solutions. This episode is part four of a five-part series dealing with how strategy fails at execution. And I'd like you to please welcome my esteemed colleague today, Duane Nicholson, Chief Transformation Officer and Organizational Analyst Extraordinaire. Thank you for joining us today, my friend.
Thanks for having me, Mike. I appreciate you providing the invite, and I'm glad to be here, hanging out with you for
Yeah.
an hour every couple of weeks.
Hey, the pleasure is always on this side of the table, my friend. Duane, we've isolated five contributors to strategy failures on execution: lack of clarity, lack of alignment, lack of prioritization, lack of accountability, and lack of adaptability. Now, we've covered the top three: clarity, alignment, and prioritization. Today, we want to discuss lack of accountability. And so I did a little research to prepare for the meeting before, and I'd like to present five symptoms of weak accountability and let you comment on each one from your background expertise. First of all, one symptom could be that ownership of that strategy is unclear. I mean, you ask five people who owns the initiative, you receive five different answers. If ownership isn't obvious, probably doesn't even exist. What's your feeling about that?
Wow, have you ever sat down and done a RACI uh, chart with the team? And when you're explicit about, hey, let's go through this RACI and figure out who owns what. That conversation that seems like it should probably be 15 to 20 minutes turns into an hour-long conversation, and you have some spillover because someone has to check with someone to find out if they're truly accountable or if someone else is accountable. It really it's a fiery topic. So when I think about accountability, this is what comes to mind. This is what's playing in my head is having these conversations with people accepting that accountability.
Have you ever had a racy where there were two A's?
Two, multiple A's. Well, you know, there's always there's it's so funny because you just have people. I don't think that it's the A's. It's everybody wants to be informed, but no one wants to be accountable. That's the my biggest thing is so many people want to be in the mix and they want to provide an opinion, but do they really want to be truly accountable for the outcomes for the project? And in most cases, no. So yes, two A's. I take two A's because two A's means someone wants to be accountable. I'm usually dealing with people who just want to be informed. They don't want to be responsible.
Well, is there ever any confusion about what accountability even means? What does it mean to be accountable?
I think that's a good question. I think that's a great question because that's not where people get hung up. It's, what's the difference? Like, let's really talk about it. What's the difference between responsible versus accountable? Um, and I think that that is a key distinction, and maybe we should talk about that. So, what's your view of accountability versus responsibility? Responsible.
Well, well, if the strategy is defined, which is, out there, may or may not be, if it fails, accountable means I failed. That
Hmm.
person failed, and there's repercussions to that. Responsible means I'm working on it. I'm working on it. I'm doing the
Right.
work. Responsible, I'm
Hmm.
doing the work. That would be my definition.
Right. And that's a great definition because it really distinguishes, leadership versus the person who's the, individual contributor and they're doing the activity. And so I think that's a very clear distinction. So when we talk about accountability, I think back to when I worked at Toyota. And at Toyota, we had scorecards. And these scorecards, uh, really focused in on, let's just say we would go to a steering committee meeting. And so in that steering committee meeting, you had five sponsors. So thinking about these five sponsors, they were accountable. So you got five people who are accountable, right, for the outcome for the project. Well, what happens is you would put the attendance of that person on your scorecard. So let's just say you have five different um, accountable people who are supposed to be in that steering committee meeting. Well, if one person doesn't show up, then on your scorecard, what happens is you are, out of five, right? So if you have five people who are supposed to be there and one person doesn't show up, guess what? Your scorecard goes down to 80. Well, imagine this, where you only have two people who are accountable. Because smaller projects, you have less accountable, less people responsible or accountable for that particular project's outcome. And so, guess what happens if that person doesn't show up to the steering committee meeting? You're at 50%. So your project becomes red. It shows red, and no one likes to see red. In project management, no one wants to see red. But that was something that was an indicator for them. They took this and literally pulled it out of uh, the PMBOK and said, okay, we need to have sponsors who are accountable. And by having sponsors who are accountable, we're going to make sure that everyone who is accountable for a project, they are visible, listening in, and providing guidance on the project. And
Hmm.
if you're not there, that means you're not accountable. And what's the likelihood that your project is going to fail in the future if you're not present and providing that guidance? So to
Hmm.
me, when I hear accountability, that's the first thing I think about is my scorecard's going to go red if my sponsors are not accountable
Hmm.
and present. So
Hmm. Yeah,
that's my tail on.
that's a great take.
Oh, yeah.
So this symptom is ownership is unclear. Second symptom, activity replaces outcomes. In other words, people are busy, so they must be doing a good job and they must be accountable. We've completed training, we've created dashboards, we had 6 meetings. Those are activities. Leadership should ask what measurable business outcome was improved. Busy does not equal successful. What's your feeling on that?
Oh, I see it all the time, and I see. So there's this chicken and egg thing in the workplace right now. Um, Everyone talks about measurement. They have data, and they have things that they can measure, but y- management is unsure what to measure, and then they push it down to the teams. And then the teams go, I'm responsible for output. They want the team wants to do a good job by saying, hey, you know what? I created things. And so when they create things, more stories, for example, it is it's not necessarily more stories now. The conversation is more story points, which I hate this topic and love it at the same time. Is our teams really pointing the work correctly? I think that we lose the activity by focusing in on story points, but story points is a perfect example where teams will game the system because they're looking at it and they're going, oh, if I put more points on a story, then that means that I have 50 points that I delivered, and someone else only delivered 10 points. And then so now we're looking at this and going, oh, this person is a rock star because they're delivered 50 points, and this other person only delivered 10 points. So they got to be delivering something that's better. But at the end of the day, it doesn't matter what those points are. You've got an entire epic that says, hey, this is what the value is, and this is what I need delivered by this time. And so, should we be focusing on the individual that's producing 50 points? Or should we be focusing on the bigger epic or the outcome, the business outcome, and going, this particular value is there? And are we truly creating or defining what that value is when we start projects? And the answer is most likely no. We haven't
Mhm.
defined what that value is up front. And because we haven't identified what that value is or the measurement, what happens is the team interprets it. And this goes back to uh, clarity and, clarity of communication. So now we have teams going, all right, I find value in my activity versus, okay, this is the outcome that I'm expecting. And so I need to deliver that particular piece.
Well,
That's
that's a
my
great
thought.
point. I never thought about gaming points before, but when I was working on a large implementation, we had so many Scrum teams, and my feeling is that the story points on one Scrum team cannot be equated to another. They're all independent of that
No,
Scrum team because you're comparing internal, work to internal work. So those are, but that could be done. We had a situation where several Scrum teams were failing because they said they were going to do so many story points of work and they did not complete the work, but they felt they should get credit for activity.
right,
Just as we were talking about before, but you don't get credit for activity. You get credit to complete things that you say
right.
you're going to complete. And so that concept you brought up, and I think it's so important. Okay, so activity replaces outcomes. Third symptom. Problems are everyone's responsibility. When everyone owns a risk, nobody solves the risk. The issue remains on the risk log, meeting after meeting, month after month. No one's really accountable. What's your feeling about that?
To me, it's easy to go through. I think what happens is people are going through the motions. And so what happens is um, you have this, I'll give you a perfect example is risks. Risks are very hard for people to, the concept itself is very difficult for most teams to get. Not sure why. I've been doing this for a long time, but understanding that a risk is something that is not happening right now, but it's something that could potentially happen in the future, and then quantifying that. So, in most projects and even in agile development, there's always a component of defining risks. Well, what happens is every it becomes so exhausting trying to develop the risk that what happens is by the end of fleshing out that actual risk, no one owns it. And so this is one of the things that I love about the SAFE concept is in big room planning is that you have what you do, what's called roam. And so in roaming, what you do is you go, okay, we've got all these risks, but one of the activities from a big room planning perspective or PI planning perspective is to make sure that you have someone who owns, it's like you came up with the risk, but who owns that? And that's what that O in Rome is. And so it's really important for us to at least coming out of that session to have an owner. You don't identify it or and then you got that oh, that's the most important thing in identifying that. And again, we have so many frameworks that we've already had, you know, PMP guidelines, and then now we have, you know, um, uh, this Rome technique that's part of PI planning, but people skip it. And that's why you have, I'm sorry, a release train engineer. And that release train engineer is supposed to be responsible for making sure something is owned before you disperse from these meetings, from this big room planning. But going back to, the original idea is that we need to have a system or make the system as simple as possible for people to be able to one, identify a risk, and then two, we have to make sure that there's a system for ensuring that we have ownership afterwards. I may have kind of deviated from the original question there, but I'm train of thought walking into this thinking about safe, and I don't like to usually use frameworks, but at the same time I feel like that is a good solution, and
Mhm.
you can incorporate that into any practice and make that part of whatever system that you're developing for your
Yeah.
organization to ensure execution doesn't fail.
Yeah, obviously scope, schedule, budget, ownership, but risk, very important. By the way, would you define Rome for those that aren't familiar with the concept of Rome? What does
Oh,
that stand for?
uh, it's your risk, ownership, accountable, and I think M is for mitigation.
Yes.
And I could be a little misinformed there, but
Yeah.
I'm trying to recall from memory. That's a
Yeah.
trick question.
Yeah. Yeah. Memory's, the second thing to go. I forget the first. Okay. So, problems are everyone's responsibility. Four, leaders rescue instead of requiring ownership. They take the job role of rescuing rather than owning. How do you feel about that as far as accountability?
Yeah, when I see that rescue or I hear about that rescue, uh, to me that's a leadership style. Um, and and it goes back to let's avoid the accountability, and that way I don't have to see things through from beginning to end and deal with certain parts of it. It's kind of like I want to be the hero, but I don't want to be the person who does the 9 to 5 job. That's
Exactly.
kind of how I see it. Uh, so when it comes to owning a project, there's a lot of things, there's a lot of steps, or owning a product. There's a lot of steps that go into building an idea into a product and then putting that product on the market. What happens is these minor steps or the minutia of building and all these checklist items, the administration, things like that go with it. Stakeholder alignment. There's so many things that go into building a new product or, being in an organization as a whole. But when someone can come in and go, look, I'm going to wait till my expertise is wanted and needed, and then they drop in and they come in and they swarm on the team and they bring in their group of people and they solve the problem and then they look like the hero. Well, to me, that's not a team player because what happens is, yes, you came in, you helped out, and then you use your team members for a short period of time. What happens is you come in, you get all the glory, then you walk away, and then there's still work that needs to be done. And those people don't get credit for carrying the torch
Mhm.
or carrying, the product over the line of completion and deployment. You only
Mhm.
came in for one sprint or two sprints just to, clear the runway and make things easier. And to me, I think that the person who comes in and swarms, yeah, it's great. They get kudos. But to me, from a leadership standpoint, I think it's better to be accountable and recognize that you have a problem and seek help and then and get the problem addressed. And to me, that's a better story than I just came in and helped and just, you know, came in and did my part and then left. So
Yeah.
I don't know that may be a little more facetious as far as my view of it, but that's how I see it. Is I rather deal with the person who's accountable from beginning to end.
Yeah. Well, don't you see it's sort of a sneaky or subtle way of avoiding accountability by being the rescuer?
Exactly.
Yeah, it's kind of sneaky in a way. It's that I'm not accountable, but I'll help those folks that are accountable. But really, you should be accountable,
Right.
but you're avoiding that. Okay, number five. Another symptom, no consequences. People quickly learn what really matters. If deadlines slip, nothing happens. If milestones are missed, nothing changes. Communication's forgotten. No conversation occurs. then accountability quietly dies. How do you feel about that?
No, I've this totally resonates with me because I work with an organization, and there were two major projects, number one and number two. I think I was working on number one, and there was a number two effort that was going on for the business unit. And the other effort, I kept hearing, oh, this project is moving again. They're in planning. Every 3 months they're in planning, and then and it's okay to be in planning, just looking at things every quarter to make sure you're still aligned. But it wasn't planning; it was a replan. So,
Hmm.
and every time they had a replan, the project kept getting longer. And you're like, whoa, so you just pushed that 3 months? I thought you were going to be done. And so it's interesting is this project started, and I had already worked on another major effort and knocked that out within a year. And this project was started then. And then now I was on another major effort, and I'm leading that effort, but that same project kept extending. It was only supposed to be about a year or two when I started the first project. So to me, going back to what you're saying about no consequences, there were no consequences. People just kept moving the date. And maybe that's okay for maybe that's okay because they agreed that it was okay. But to me, if you've established a goalpost, there needs to be someone who's accountable for ensuring that that goalpost is met. And so the first time you slip, that's okay, right? Because you go, hey, we know more, we have more information, so therefore we can make a better judgment call on what we need to do. But once you start slipping that second or third time, that lets me know that either one, it's not important, or two, going back to the consequences is there are no consequences, so just let's go ahead and let it slip. But it still circles back to consequences. If
Hmm.
you know, if it, and is it important? Is it is it important? If it's not important, why have 20, 30 people working on an effort? There's a cost associated with working on something versus another. And I can't think of that term right now. Opportunity cost. That's what that's that
Yeah.
magic word. Opportunity cost for working on something and instead of something else. And so you got 20, 30 people who are working on a project that keeps slipping. So then that means you're delaying uh, the cost or how much money you could divert to something else that's going to be valuable. And if you're allowing something to slip like that, it means to me that it's not important. But yes, consequences go into it.
Yeah. Yeah. Essentially, even if you have what you're referring to as a like a time and materials shop,
Right.
where they just whatever time it takes, whatever materials it takes, there should at a minimum, even if you want to run a shop like that, you should have reasoning behind the
Hmm.
slippages that are good, solid reasonings that leadership can understand, but not just, well, we got to slip it a month. I've seen initiatives slip a month by month for over a year with no explanation. It just takes longer. That's not okay. That's not good management. And of course, there are no consequences of that. So after a while, would you agree that you're just training the workforce to just not care if you
Oh
make
yeah.
it or not? There's no consequences. Okay, so to summarize, why don't I go through some accountability breakdowns with you real quick? I'll go through them all and then I'll ask for your feedback on them, okay?
Okay.
Several reasons appear that's we touched on today. One is fear. People avoid ownership because that creates visibility and risk, and it feels safer to stay in the middle. Politics. Sometimes success threatens other departments. People protect their territory rather than execute strategy. The organization begins optimizing departments rather than the enterprise. Ambiguity. People cannot be accountable for expectations that are not clearly defined. You can't own a moving target, if you will. And then poor leadership, sometimes leader unintentionally create dependencies. Every decision must flow through them. Eventually, employees stop deciding altogether and just push everything up, which creates organizational stagnation. So, of those, any final comments on what you see as accountability breakdowns?
Let's talk about poor leadership. And I see that you, or I heard you mention unintentionally create dependence. I don't think it's unintentional, honestly. I think that, um, maybe it is. I think probably 10-20% of the time is unintentionally creating dependency. However, I see that some leaders do this as a tactic. It's a method, and you can recognize it. And they're doing it so then that way they can maintain control, and they they're basically there to ensure that they have a job for eternity. So they create that dependency, and I think that when you have a work culture, the reason why leaders do this, or should I say, managers do this, is because you're in a work culture that only values you based on what you're doing for them now. And so what happens is you create this workplace that goes, I need to protect my fiefdom. I need to make sure that I'm the most valuable player. So then that
Mm-hmm.
way you're not replaced. And I'm sure right now where, there's tons of layoffs,
Mm-hmm.
we've got AI replacing people. This is what's happening. One of the things I've been talking to different leaders, and what I'm hearing is that AI, there's almost a revolt from employees at this point. Everyone's saying use AI, but at the same time, employees are getting they're kind of put off, and they're going, if I start using AI, you're just going to replace me. So therefore, they don't use AI. So it's so that's a smaller version of the leadership issue, which is I need to be this cog in the machine, and without me, this machine can't work. And so I don't think it's unintentional.
Great comment. Yeah. Duane, I'm going to put your information in the description as well as a summary of what we talked about today. If anyone wants to contact Duane or myself and talk and collaborate on this further, please do. Please feel free to put your comments in the comments section if you have anything to add. And with that, thank you, Duane. And in our next podcast, we'll deal with adaptability.
Perfect. Sounds like a great conversation. I think that this was a tough topic, and we brought home some really key points, but I'm looking forward to hearing what other people think.
Yeah, same here. Thank you,
All right.
Duane. Talk to you next time.
All right. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.
Bye.